she's a member of parliament. She gives a speech on a fairly complicated topic, and she's completely comfortable having some random third party AI translate and lip sync her speech into various languages. Hey everyone, and welcome to SlatorPod. Hi there, Esther.
Hi, Florian.
So another news episode, time to unpack all of the news that's happened since we were on last time. It's about 3 weeks ago. A lot has happened since. And we'll be back with a great guest episode again later in the week. So what's on the agenda today? I want to talk a bit about what I think is a watershed moment in consumer translation AI. There's some new jobs emerging, new job titles that we lightly disagree about its significance, you and I. Then we look at if GPT is good at PEMT, post-editing MT. Dubbing's nightmare is over, and you're going to give us a bit of a financial update. Lots of companies have reported since we were on last time. Now, our report, we have a new pro guide out. It's called Slator Pro Guide Scaling an LSP Key Account, which basically tells you how you take a small client and turn it into a big client. That is very helpful, right? Because don't we all have a lot of small clients we wished were much bigger clients, especially in language services? How was that in your prior LSP life? Did you carefully select from the outset, or you just kind of onboarded a lot of small clients and hoped they eventually turn into big clients, or what was the process?
Well, I was in production, so I wasn't really so involved in, let's say, selecting clients. But I mean, I certainly worked on some giant accounts that felt like they kept growing. So, I think at least back then, part of the role seemed to be assisting sales with this kind of account management and account growth by delivering well as a project manager for your clients. So I think that's, in my mind, a key part of it as well. Yeah.
It is. And I mean, you have, like, we did a lot of Google ads, and of course people still do this, right? LSPs, you attract kind of a long tail of very small leads. You put a Google ad out, and or maybe you have a piece of content somewhere, you advertise, and then some marketing manager of a big company emails you. Maybe the entire enterprise's account is with some other provider, but you kind of get in there and you sneak into via kind of a marketing manager, and then you kind of curate that relationship, you nurture that relationship, and then hopefully you're going to expand share of wallet, right? So it is a big challenge for many LSPs, because I don't think many LSPs are very strict when it comes to client selection at the outset. So I don't think a lot of LSPs would say, well, I'm not going to take work from you because you're just a small client and we don't see the master service agreement right around the corner, so we're going to not onboard you. There were a few of those. There are a few LSPs like that are very selective, but I think the majority of LSPs are not. So head over, get that pro guide. I think it's extremely well written, super helpful in, well, how do you get the small clients into a big client?
Presumably also relying on the fact that the client itself has a bigger budget than what they are currently allocating to you. I.e., it's not that it is a tiny client that only has sort of, a couple of $1,000 in annual spend, but more so that there's a more budget out there for you to capture.
I mean, I remember I once ran into like a marketing manager of Walmart, like in Hong Kong back in the days. And, I'm like, oh, I'll send you something. And I'm like, oh, you're Walmart. You're like one of the world's biggest companies, right? So it was very obvious that whatever they sent me from their Hong Kong office wasn't all of Walmart's translation volume, right? So you have these big logos, and you're like, well, I get like a tiny fraction.
A tiny slice of a big logo, turn that into a giant slice of a giant logo.
Correct. And so there's a whole journey that you have to do. And especially once you kind of hit maybe 10, 20, 30K annual revenue, like how do you get it to the next level? It's not as easy as many people think. Hey, SlatorCon Remote around the corner this month, November 29th. Keynote, Bertrand Stalder, CEO of Accolade, Then we're going to have a panel moderated by Anna, group discussion with Gabriel, who was on the podcast last week, founder and CEO of BureauWorks. Constantine from Intento is going to speak. We got BBC Studios, Vanessa Lecomte, talking about media localization, AI dubbing, etc. Panel discussion with TBO talent, the Charles Campbell, and then AstraZeneca, Global IT and Training Language Services Lead, Christoph Makropoulos. So great program, great agenda in the works. Go and register. I think it's going to be, this seems like a very popular one. We're selling a lot of tickets for this one. So head over as well and get yours. I want to talk about what I think is a bit of a watershed moment in translation AI, because it involves yours truly. That's why it's a watershed moment. So what happened is, like some Bitcoin account tweeted out the, Bitcoin account I follow, Swan Bitcoin. They tweeted out the speech by a German member of parliament, and she was in the Bundestag, like the German parliament, and she was speaking English, and she was talking about the dangers of CBDCs, like central bank digital currencies. Let's not go there, but basically she was speaking about the dangers of CBDCs, and I was like watching, and I'm like, why is she speaking English? Like she's in the German parliament. That doesn't really make sense. So, like, I was trying to process that clip, 10 seconds, 20 seconds, 30 seconds. I'm like, why is she speaking English? So I'm just scrolling down a bit in the tweet. I'm like, oh, it was done, basically the account that tweeted it out was saying, well, this was done using AI translations. And I didn't figure it out right there, right then. So this was the first time I very obviously fell for this kind of third-party created AI translation lip-synced thing, for lack of a better term. And I was like, oh my God, like this, the voice sounded natural. The lips, obviously, if you're not like primed for it, you're not like following the lips super closely. Didn't sound awkward. Sure, I mean, in retrospect, like I watched the video again.
Were you watching on your phone or on a tablet? Or
no, on the big screen. But yeah, it was Twitter, so it wasn't super large, I guess, the thing. And I mean, like now, of course, I replayed it. I'm like, well, sure, you wouldn't like say it exactly like this in English, because there were a few, like language things. But yeah, fell for it. Crazy. Now, there's a second part to the story. So a couple hours later, I went in it again, and then the X algorithm suggested another tweet by that member of parliament, who tweeted out that she loves that this is now possible. So she's like, oh, it's incredible what AI can do these days. In this thread, and then she linked the thing that I just, watched. I speak English and Portuguese and Spanish and French and Indonesian and even Chinese. So to me, she's a member of parliament. She gives a speech on a fairly complicated topic, and she's completely comfortable having some random third party AI translate and lip sync her speech into various languages, many of which she probably doesn't understand at all. So to me, that kind of signals the level of confidence some people now have in the capabilities of these systems, if they're not like intimately familiar, like obviously most people that are on this podcast are. It's a bit of it's kind of another kind of Hey Gen-like moment for me.
Do you know, or was it clear what the third party was, or who had applied the AI? Like who had done the translation?
I don't know the tech behind it. Actually, I should have probably researched that. I don't know who that was. I just know the account that tweeted it out. It's just some Bitcoin exchange. So, people know that exchange, but like it's nothing like super authoritative.
I wonder if she hadn't liked it, could she have come down hard on them, saying like, you don't have my permission to to disseminate this in English?
Of course she could have, right? I mean, frankly, I wouldn't love that if especially if it was a speech that was, this is an important speech on an important topic that she says, she basically gives in the German parliament. So in terms of like the level of criticality of content, this is pretty high. This ranks fairly high. It's a speech in the parliament, so it's not like it's some random tweet somebody localized, and it's her voice. I mean, of course the AI voice cloned it, right? So it's her voice being altered, it's her lip movements being altered, and she's totally comfortable with it. So yeah, I mean, I don't know, maybe she's a trailblazer, but I think it's just interesting how comfortable people have gotten in like within weeks with this stuff. So her being people. So let's see. I'm sure there's pushback, but anyway, watershed moment, at least for me. So maybe some people, one of the people that's going to work on this is an AI localization analyst, which is an ad we dug out, and I keep talking about it. So who's recruiting the AI localization analyst, Esther?
It's Chubb. I didn't know who that was either, but it's an insurance company the role itself is based in London, but the company is Chubb. Its parent company is Chubb Limited, which is an American company incorporated in Zurich. And one of, I think a very old company, sort of founded in the late 18th century, publicly traded, very sort of traditional, obviously insurance, old school. So that's the company, and they're looking for an AI, or at least they were at the time of us writing this article, was looking for an AI localization analyst. Which, we sort of analyzed the job ad to death, I think, in terms of reading into what this person may or may not be doing as part of their role, and whether we think that this person is easily findable, whether you can find somebody who would be suitable for the role, which I think definitely yes. However, I mean, in my view, some of the key responsibilities are a little bit random. But yeah, you share your take.
So my take was more like, hey, this is an exciting ad for somebody from the language field, because, usually you need some type of PhD or MA, or you need some in NLP or some coding experience or something like this. And this one, the only hard requirement is you need a BA or a master's in linguistics, international relations, language studies, or related fields. So, there's a lot of people studying still, translation, linguistics, language studies out there. So this could be something. I mean, there's a few other things, like you need to have experience in localization, internationalization of software products.
You can find those people in London for sure. Yeah.
You can find these people in London. Maybe even you worked on like some kind of app localization on Phrase for half a year, and I guess you tick that box. So I looked more at the requirements, and you looked more at the responsibilities. And so give us a couple of those responsibilities, because I didn't even look at these particularly. They seemed a bit kind of all over the place, but yeah.
One thing to say is that, as far as I understand it, this is sort of reporting into what is essentially a new division. So it's somewhat understandable that maybe they don't quite know what they're looking for, especially if it is a new role. You do sort of see that, where it's like, well, we think we need somebody to do this, and we think that that's what it's going to look like. But so I mean, some of the responsibilities would be localizing AI systems themselves to customize them into various cultures, languages, and regions. Then testing AI systems throughout their development cycles. And it says looking for things like accuracy, relevance, and cultural appropriateness. So some of it seems not very contained in terms of, how on earth do you go out there and test AI systems in their development cycle for cultural appropriateness, for example? Like, isn't that one of the main main problems and issues out there? And then another one, which I think is pretty broad reaching, is identify gaps or errors in the AI language model. But it does sound like a collaborative role. Obviously, they'll have access to developers and people who are working on the AI side, developing it.
You read this a bit more close than I did, because you're right. Test AI systems, and localize AI systems. So we're not really defining what the AI systems are, but then still they're talking about errors in the AI language model. So on the one hand, it looks like you're actually localizing the AI software, but then you're also localizing the actual language. So you're doing everything. You're right.
Yeah. But I mean, the one thing I would say, and I've noticed this quite a lot on like, in the enterprise and on buy side, when there's a new role and it comes to, I mean, anything, but obviously particularly my area of interest in localization, sometimes you do see a job role and you think, well, I could definitely do this role. However, you know, the requirements are slightly different than what I have, or maybe a role is pitched at a very junior level and actually, you know, from experience what they need is something completely different. So I have, you know, spoken to people who've gone into interviews for roles that seem sort of new at a company and then have kind of gone in with a bit more of a consultative attitude and ended up with the job or expanding the job or sort of shrinking the job, but actually being able to make something quite tangible out of it. So maybe that's the right attitude here.
Absolutely. So if anybody who listens to this podcast applied to this and got the job, let us know.
I expect a referral fee.
We'd love to have you on the pod. I think about 60 people replied according to LinkedIn. So the question is now, my next question that we're trying to unpack is GPT-4 good at post-editing machine translation? And a team of Microsoft Azure researchers looked into this. How do you pronounce that? Microsoft Azure? Azure? Azure?
Yeah, I mean, I think in my variation of English, Azure, like a y, Azure. But I've heard it Azure, yeah, as well. And I'm not the American speaker, so probably considered wrong.
I mean, when I read this, it's just Côte d'Azur, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Why pick a name? Nobody. This is one of the most important pieces of their company, and like you pick a name people can't pronounce. Anyway, well, they're a $3 trillion company, so I guess who are we to weigh in on their Azure name? Study revealed, back to the GPT is good at post editing, that it's adept at post editing. It not only produced meaningful and trustworthy edits, but also removed different types of major errors in the translated text. But it also hallucinated. It hallucinated some edits and prevented them from saying that it's an expert post editor. So it's good, but not great, right? So we're still at this kind of like last mile where the human expert reigns. Because I mean, to me, it's almost like if it's good at post editing, like that capability will get rolled into machine translation. So it's just more machine translation.
Yes. So what's left? Just the final QC or something.
All right. Good, but not great. That's the takeaway from this particular research paper. We're flooded with research papers, because of the EMNLP that's happening in Singapore. You and I, we went there in Brussels in 2018. Now they're going to Singapore, Sentosa. Nice. Just kind of the little island just in front of the main Singapore island with these, they got the amusement park. I'm not sure which one it is, but there's like this kind of, and the hotel and everything. So anyway, all of the NLP researchers, probably like 4,000 or 5,000 this time, are going to go to Singapore. And that's why there's a flood of research papers. Now, what's going to also come in as potentially a flood is new movies, because now the actors' strike is over.
Thank goodness. Yeah.
Yes, I'm running out of Netflix. So I'm only watching YouTube now. So yeah, strikes over. The writers stopped the strike. Now the actors also, and that was good for Zoo Digital, our friends listed. So their stock went up like 100% since end of October. Went from like 33 back to 67. This stock is incredibly volatile, even compared to some other stocks. Like you have things like Straker's kind of volatile, but not that. RWS is a bit volatile. Like, the captioning company, what's its name? AI Media is volatile, but not as volatile as Zoo. Zoo is like all over the place. So they went up to 190, 200. They went up to 200, dropped to like 35. So within the space of less than a year. So in March, it traded at 200, dropped to 30 in October, and now it's back at almost 70 after the strike ended. So, well, anyway, the people, because they posted a loss, suited, and people were concerned that if the strike drags on longer, they're going to be unprofitable for longer. But now strike's over, so people. Now, also interesting, just very briefly, RWS posted some update like 10 days ago, and then the stock went down like 25% or something. Check me on the math here, maybe a little less, maybe 30%, 25%. But since then, it's almost come back 20% like to where it started before the update, which is interesting. Like usually you don't see that dip. There's no general market upturn since. And so seems like somebody sold a big chunk of shares, and then people kind of looked at the fundamentals of RWS again and kind of started buying back in. So yeah, maybe the market reaction was a little bit overdone. That was media and stock market updates. So now let's head over into M&A and funding. You have a few stories for us there.
Yeah, just a couple from the past few weeks that we've covered on Slator. So the first was a Canadian media localization company, speaking of media localization, that also acquired another Canadian studio called Wanted. So it's Difuze, based out of Montreal, acquired Wanted, which is a post-production studio in Toronto. Difuze, so reasonable size here, around $24 million in 2022. Most of that, sort of 85% or something, is localization related in some way, shape, or form. I think they also do some post-production services as well. But they have acquired Wanted, then, a smaller company, but essentially helping them to expand within the Canadian market. And they had the transaction that was supported by a Quebec-based institutional investor called the Fonds de Solidarité, FTQ, which had invested in Difuze, sort of as part of a long-term growth strategy there. We also did speak to the co-founder of Difuze about the strikes at the time, obviously sort of a few weeks ago. But he was sort of saying that in Canada, it's sort of largely unaffected, obviously different market, so that they, unlike some of the others, had not been quite so affected by the strikes. But yes, like many others, I'm sure glad nonetheless that the strikes have ended, as you said. And then another, externally backed translation localization company is the Translation People over in the UK. So they were previously already privately got backed by private equity, but then have the news here is that they've recently secured another £10.5 million in debt financing. So that happened back in September, but we just covered it fairly recently. As I said, they also are private equity backed, and that private equity investment happened, I think, around a year ago. But the motivation, the rationale here is their very ambitious buy and build program. So they're planning to use the funds raised for future acquisitions. They already acquired one Scotland-based LSP fairly recently since the private equity backing, and obviously seem to be going on a bit of an acquisition trail there. So that is the M&A corner. Hopefully few more. I think we'll have a few more stories in the next few weeks as well.
Then they need to pay interest on this. So that's what's the interest level in the UK? What's like the typical mortgage?
5, 6, I think. I'm trying not to look personally, burying my head in the sand. I think it's around 5 or 6. Yeah.
All right, so this is going to be a little higher. Not cheap. So, good old zero interest rate days are over. Now, we got a couple more from the financial side. So AI Media updated investors on their shift to SaaS revenues. We had the CEO on the podcast. So basically they're moving from a more service or kind of more service angle to a basically just selling the platform and having it as software as a service revenue. So what happened there?
The news that we covered here was their AGM, but they were talking about the previous financial year, which ended in June. So that was full year 2022. They described it as a significant, 2023, full year 2023. They described it as a significant year of transformation. I mean, as you described, basically continuing that transformation towards more SaaS revenues. And then as a result, that did have an impact on both gross profit and EBITDA. So they're now, at least on an EBITDA level, up to, what's that, AUD, so Aussie dollars 3.3 million in EBITDA, but up 200%. So that's a big percentage jump, but obviously still small, relatively speaking, in EBITDA there. But yeah, point being, they're going through this transformation and shift, and seeing into they're now in financial year 2024. I think they've just probably concluded Q1, saying that in Q1 the revenues increased 10% compared with the year before, and that's despite a single-digit decline in the legacy services business.
They call it legacy.
Legacy, yeah, it sort of indicates the way that they're going with the business there.
Yeah, because they're integrating all kinds of third-party tech and make it accessible. So maybe, because now it just Whisper's out. The new Whisper I just saw from OpenAI, I don't know what version it is, Whisper Turbo or something. Yeah, like this is, speech to text. So that's their core business. Now, AMN Healthcare, they again talked about language services being an outperformer.
Yeah, it's sort of a mixed bag, I think. So you've got AMN Language Services Division, which people may remember was formed from the acquisition of Stratus Video in 2020. AMN being very focused on healthcare, and in this case, healthcare-related translation and interpreting. So it's typically done really well, showing good growth over quarter on quarter, which is how they're reporting the revenues. So this, I think in the third quarter, so Q3 2023, language services generated 66 million. So apparently that was more up 20% year on year, and also up 4% compared to the previous quarter. So AMN is saying that language services is the primary driver, they call it, within that the particular business unit that they're housed in, which is technology and workforce solutions. But sort of outside of language services, the revenues of the TWS unit fell in Q3. And they interestingly said gross margins within that unit, within TWS, fell from the previous years in Q3, fell by around 10 percentage points. And they said the drop was primarily due to an unfavorable revenue mix shift and lower gross margins in language services. So on the one hand, it's providing revenue, like growth on a revenue level, but then something seems to be going on here in terms of the gross margins.
Hey, have you built your own GPT over the weekend, Esther?
Not yet. It's on my to-do list. Have you?
It's crazy. I built the SlatorPod bot. So I fed it with not one transcript, but 5 transcripts. So for those who don't know what I'm talking about, so OpenAI just released the capability of basically training your own GPT. If you are a paid subscriber for OpenAI, you can now basically upload all kinds of data and basically train. And it was super fast. I think it trained it in within 30 seconds or something. You can upload your own data, train your own chatbot essentially, and then actually you can even share the link and send it to somebody else, and that somebody else can then question your GPT. It's a terrible name. They should not call it GPT. I mean, people keep mixing it up.
I go between calling it GBP, as in the British pound, to something completely different. GTP as well. Yeah.
I just read an article yesterday in the leading Swiss newspaper about AI and ChatGPT, and they they just consistently misspelled it GTP.
Have you heard of it being called Geppetto?
Geppetto? No.
Yeah, because I think, was it a French speaker who told me this? I've completely blanked on who was telling me that they have a nickname for ChatGPT, which is Geppetto. Like Pinocchio.
Oh, Pinocchio.
Geppetto. Isn't that the same? That's the same, right? Yeah. Well,
I don't
okay,
know.
we'll have to do further research, but apparently a sort of a not too friendly nickname for ChatGPT is Geppetto.
Well, it does hallucinate. I wouldn't call it lying. It's not doing it on purpose. So back to the GPT building. So basically, I mean, what I was able to gather from other podcasts is, it's basically the idea is to create like almost like an app store of GPTs. So you can create your own GPT, you post it, you make it publicly available, it gets listed in some OpenAI store of GPTs. And so, yeah, I mean, the App Store was a huge success. So maybe that's what they're trying. And I guess for the purposes of this podcast, it could be relevant because, people could upload all kinds of language data and maybe make very kind of custom language GPTs for all kinds of niche cases. Interesting times. I do recommend everybody go and just get one of those subscriptions. I mean, it's $20 a month, and you should play around with it. If you're in the language industry, you need to play around with this stuff as it happens. All right. Thank you very much for your attention. Go get tickets for SlatorCon Remote, and we'll see you soon.
Bye.